Good morning, everybody. We will be discussing political issues with civility. This is our legislative advocacy series, session number 7. Now, my background is I'm a self-advocate, and I'll do everything on issues that intersection of disability and race. In January 1984, the Chicago Public School System opened the autistic program for students for me and many others. I'm a member of and leader of many communities and organizations like the Illinois Council of Developmental Disabilities, as their committee, and with Access Living's group that is not going on right now, but it's listed as unofficial called Racial Justice, Advance Your Leadership Power, and many others that you see underneath there. In addition, I'm the Alliance for Community Services Steering Committee, Chicago Adapt, Illinois Single Payer Coalition board member and Disability Committee for ISBC, Illinois Single Payer Coalition, and North Side for Justice membership and Subcommittee Human Services Committee. Next slide. Housekeeping. A recording of this meeting will be sent out along with notes and a link to the presentation within the next week. Please keep yourself muted while our presentation is talking. Please leave questions until the end of the presentation, and captions available by pressing the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And let's be respectful to others. Words to know, we have hierarchy, a system where some people are seen as better than other people. We have identity, we have colonialism, where an outside country takes over indigenous people's land. Capitalism and economic system where businesses are owned by bosses, not workers. We have racism, how heteropathia, a system where people who are straight and men are seen as better than others, and reduce civil obedience of disrupt their everyday lives, lifelines, and fight for a cause. Next slide. Now I'm gonna turn it over to Rio.
Thanks, Curtis. Hi, everyone. I'm Goodwin, Perez. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the director of the Going Home Coalition. This is a little bit on my background. I'm not going to read everything, but I am an educator, an artist, and an organizer with hidden physical disabilities and neurodivergence. And I have been an organizer for 10 years, which is why I am so excited to discuss today's topic with you all. So today we'll be discussing political issues with civility. And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that during this conversation, at no point will you be encouraged to kind of sit down and take it. Discussing things with civility doesn't mean that you have to silence yourself or you have to shrink yourself. And this discussion is really important because it's very key that we remember that even if we are being respectful, we should still be fighting for our rights passionately and that we should take up space. So before we get started on the actual topic today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us through some system overviews so that we can jump into the topic with what feels like a comfortable enough foundation for us to be able to really understand what we're discussing. So the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge who lived on our land, who lives now, and the traditional lands uh, of different, excuse me, different regional tribes. We have a long list of people who have traditionally used Chicago as a trade center because of the waterways that pass through this region and their connection to the Great Lakes system. I'm not going to read through this entire list because I don't want to kind of mess up the pronunciation of these indigenous words. But many of us are really familiar with groups who have lived and continue to live in this land, such as the Anishinaabe, the Illinois, the Miami, the Ho Chunk, Kickapoo, Menominee, and of course, Chicago is the city that has the largest population of indigenous urban people in the entire United States. And I believe that population is somewhere around 100,000. And I do want to acknowledge that the work that we do here as people who are fighting for disability rights is following in the footsteps of Black, Indigenous people of color who came before us, who fought for their rights to be protected and for their people to be safe. And we have the immense privilege of following in the hard work that they did. Lots of sacrifices were made for us to be able to even have this conversation among one another. So, just want to acknowledge that. And I am a big map person, so I wanted to bring up this exciting resource. You can see here on the screen is a map of the Chicago area. And on the screen, you can see that there are several, very many icons of what look to be teepees that represent sites of villages that historically were present in this region. It's important to mention that the indigenous people who were living in this region, they were not sedentary peoples. They were nomadic and they tended to travel with the seasons and the migration of big game and the movement of different passages of water. As you know, water doesn't always stay in the same place. So these are just representations of some of the villages that historically have existed in our region. But if you follow this link down here, it's going to take you to a really exciting website that I just found recently. It's called Indigenous Chicago. And on Indigenous Chicago, you'll see a lot of different resources, different maps for us to be able to understand the area that I am in. The reason that I'm speaking specifically about Chicago instead of about the state as a whole is because I am in Rogers Park right now. And Rogers Park is very close to a place called Indian Boundary Park, and that is a place of displacement for Indigenous people. So this history is very, very present in our lives, and it's something that we should always be thinking about is how did we get here and why are we here and how are we moving through this space and what privileges do we have to move through this space? So let's talk about systems and structures. This is something that a lot of us like to talk about a lot because it really affects our daily lives, the systems that we exist inside of. But how did the system that we exist inside of the United States even get here? So as we all know, Europeans colonized the United States beginning in the late 1400s, and they created a system of hierarchy. So at that time, in the many European they weren't called nations at that time, monarchies that existed, um, there was a hierarchy that existed. And that means that certain people are better or less than other people. So, in the top of the European hierarchy would be white people who are at the very top is the king, and then below that would be the upper class, and then your merchant class and artisans and things like that. And all the way down at the bottom are people who are indentured servants or slaves. And this system has many parts that judge people based on their identities. And the system that we exist in now in the United States is a direct result of the arrival of European people in the United States. So previously, Indigenous people had a very wide variety of systems of hierarchy or non-hierarchy, excuse me. Um, and when they arrived, when Europeans arrived, all of that changed. So all of these words up top, colonialism, racism, capitalism, and cis heteropatriarchy, Curtis defined those for us at the beginning, But when it comes down to it, all of these words are um, just systems that judge people based off of where they're born, what they look like, how much money they have, and their gender and sexuality. And we all fit inside of these systems. And the reason that I want to make sure that we understand that is because when we are active in organizing work and advocacy, we have to think about the ways that our different identities play a part in how we see the world. So our identities are more than just our political beliefs. There's things like class, race, ethnicity, your gender, your sexuality, your disability, education, your citizenship status, your place of birth, that all affect how we see the world. And they often determine whether we are aware of issues from birth or if we have to learn about them. So people who are, upper class and white may not have to understand what it means to be a Black person who is poor or be a person who is disabled and is poor. And because we exist inside of different identities, they shape the perspective that we have on the world. So if we want to work in advocacy, we have to be aware of the way that our identities keep us from seeing other people's perspectives. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, advocacy is the ability to see different perspectives and want to change the world based off of knowledge that you learn, that you're learning from other people who are in the fight with you, because we don't know it all. And it's impossible for us to know it all. And so that's why it's so important for us to be willing to listen and understand the experiences of others. So when we're talking about civility, we're not really focusing on this idea of being polite. A lot of us have been tasked with being polite since birth. I grew up in the South, in Tennessee, and in the South, being polite as a person of color is very important. And it doesn't always come from a place of mutual respect. Often, politeness is focusing on quieting yourself and making yourself more presentable to basically a white audience. So, what I don't want us to do is lean on this idea of just being polite. What I want us to lean on is the idea of moving with respect. And respect goes beyond just being nice. It means that you're seeing other people as full people instead of just their identities or just your misunderstanding of who they are. And if we're treating one another with respect, it gives us a better chance to be able to actually advocate for someone's needs instead of what we think that they might need. So the word civil comes from the Latin root civis, which means citizen. So when we're civil, it means that we're acting as citizens who are responsible to one another. We're all living here in the United States, and whether or not we disagree with someone, we are all responsible to one another because we're all citizens of this country. And no matter what our background is, no matter what our identities are, we all are tasked with coexisting with the people who are living around us. When we are talking about being civil in advocacy or civil disobedience, we can be civil while being perceived as impolite by people who want to take away our rights. So this is where I say this conversation isn't about how can I be nice to everyone around me? How can I shrink myself so that I'm not making as big of a fuss to everyone around me? Because a lot of the people who fought for our rights, they were perceived as being impolite. Some examples that I brought up are the nonviolent lunch counter sit-ins that started in the South in the 60s. Those folks, those Black folks who were organizers, They were directly confronted with the reality of segregation in their everyday lives, and they were taking things into their own hand, and they were saying to the larger United States that being separated from other people was unacceptable. And unfortunately, no matter how politely they asked for their rights to be handed to them, um, the white people who were in charge did not want that to happen. There was really a lot of pushback against desegregation. And so what organizers did as part of the beginning of the civil rights movement, part of the beginning of the civil disobedience movement in the 1960s, was they went to segregated lunch counters, basically diners, and they sat in the whites only seats. And they were treated very, very violently by the white people who were eating at those establishments, the white people who owned those establishments. And because they were in a place where they were not supposed to be, they were perceived as impolite. But they were ultimately being good citizens and being civil towards one another, because they were fighting for equal rights. They were fighting for equal citizenship, as was afforded to them by the Constitution. Um, so, all of this to say that when we are working and organizing, oftentimes when we're fighting for our rights, we're going to be seen as impolite by people who want to maintain the status quo and people who want things to be exactly how they have been, where, for example, disabled people are still discriminated against. So it's okay to be seen as impolite as long as we're still being respectful towards one another. And I would go even further to say it's important to be seen as impolite because disturbing business as usual is how we have our rights given to us. So I want to talk about a really important woman. Her name is Sojourner Truth, and many of us have probably heard her name. Um, And the reason that I want to bring up Sojourner Truth is because she was an incredibly passionate advocate who was not afraid to speak her mind and share the truth of her reality. And she was often seen as impolite, but ultimately she was a very, very respectful woman. Sojourner Truth was born into enslavement in New York State, and she freed herself. Her story is so incredible because she decided one day that she shouldn't be a slave anymore, and she literally just got up and walked off of the plantation that she was living in. She knew that she had some neighbors who would be able to keep her safe. And so she just walked to their house and she decided she was no longer going to be an enslaved person. And that was the beginning of her advocacy. She spent the rest of her life working as a very, very passionate, very, very outspoken um, uh, advocate against slavery. And she also fought for women's rights to vote, and she fought for other marginalized people as well. Um, and her speaking style, while it was respectful, it wasn't always seen as polite because she would call the establishment out and she would say, "This is not okay. You're walking all over my rights, and I shouldn't be expected to just sit down and take it, right?" But ultimately, she was fighting for not only her ability to participate in the country and be a citizen of equal status, but she was fighting for those around her. She was being the definition of a good citizen. Jennifer dropped in the chat a link to learn a little bit more about Sojourner Truth. I really recommend reading about her story. Some of us are familiar with her very famous speech called "Ain't I a Woman?" Um, Ain't I a Woman is a speech about women's rights and especially enslaved women's rights. And she's basically saying in this speech, um, am I not a woman who is as equal, is as valuable as a man? And why am I not seen as valuable as a man, or as important, or as worthy of rights as a man? And I think her story is really interesting because that speech actually, the version of that speech that many of us have read or maybe heard is actually a caricature of the speech that she actually wrote and gave. She did not speak with a Southern accent or a stereotypical, like, enslaved person accent, the idea of an enslaved person who is less intelligent. She was very well spoken. And I recommend you follow this link because you'll be able to read a little bit more about how even while she was fighting for her rights to be equal, people were still treating her as if she was uneducated and as if she wasn't able to form her beliefs as well as someone who maybe spent their lives going to school. So I think it's really interesting how even though she was being a respectful person and she was speaking civilly, other people weren't treating her as a full person. And that kind of speaks to the ability of the many very important self-advocates and organizers who came before us, who, despite being treated with disrespect, maintained their ability to be respectful towards those around them because they cared about other people as full people. So I know, especially considering the news over this past weekend, things in the world feel very, very tense. And in our country, things feel very, very tense. And so it feels often basically impossible to have a conversation with someone who has different political beliefs than you. And it feels often very difficult to have a civil discussion with someone who, say, for example, does not believe that you should have the rights that you should. I am a person who is trans and I am part of the queer community. And it feels really hard for me to be able to have a conversation with people who don't think that I should exist as a trans person. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we have more in common than we think with some of these people who are fighting against us. And that's what's so important to remember when we're engaging in this work, is that when it comes down to it, we are all human, and the majority of us have more in common than we think. We have more in common with someone who is, a worker than someone who is trying to take away our rights, right? And so when we're working in advocacy and organizing, it's important that we find those points of connection that can help make change happen. Some of our most important leaders, for example, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who just passed away, he was a founder of the Rainbow Push Coalition. And the Rainbow Push Coalition was a movement, an organization that united Black people, that united gay people, that united women in a common fight for liberation. And that's something that's really important for us to be doing, is seeing, like, how do our causes overlap and how can I see what ultimately makes someone human beyond just their political beliefs, right? Because, like we said, we all have many identities that exist beyond what side of the aisle we're on or what side of the political spectrum we're on. And that's what's so important to identify so that we're able to really step into movement work, into organizing or advocacy, seeing other people as full humans rather than just a Democrat or a Republican or, someone who you perceive as having a different political perspective than you. And I want to bring us to this phrase that I really love. If one of us are chained, none of us are free. This is something that I return to all the time because for me, am someone who holds a lot of different identities, and so it's important for me to be fighting for people who hold all of those identities rather than just one. Because if I was just fighting for, the freedom of Puerto Rican people, then I would be neglecting the important work to liberate people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus, or people who are immigrants, or people who are working class. Um, so we have to understand that all of our identities, all of us fall in different places under these overarching systems that we exist inside of. And we have to ensure that we're covering all the bases, that we're working for everyone, because that's how we make a better world. And I want to talk about healthy debate. So, coming back to this idea of politeness, I think a lot of the times it's seen as impolite to disagree. It's seen as impolite to have a debate or a healthy discussion or a disagreement. But ultimately, we're all humans, and it's impossible for us to all have the same perspectives or opinions. Part of being a human is being able to have your own opinion on the world and be able to see the world uniquely. And that's what makes us so beautiful. So it's unfair for us to expect for everyone to agree with us. But the work comes when we're agreeing that we're fighting for the common good instead of against one another. And that way we're able to engage in healthy debate and healthy discussion without wanting to be hateful or hurtful towards one another. It's okay to push back when someone is saying something harmful. In fact, I would say it's necessary to push back because that's the only way that people who disagree with us or hold different perspectives than us are going to learn. And that's the only way that we're going to learn is if we're challenged. And I think it's unfair for us to think that we all have to agree in order for our society to move forward. In fact, I think a lot of people who engage in political theory, who talk about the way that our country should be run politically, they see the importance, the necessity of disagreeing with one another, because that's how you get to the right conclusion, right? Think of it as a science, right? It's important that we use the scientific method, and sometimes the scientific method involves long periods of experimentation and being able to figure out what the different variables are that might change the end result, right? It's important for us to try new things, to experiment with what we believe in, because that's how we're going to be able to learn and grow as people and ultimately be able to formulate our own opinions and how we see the world. And like I said, it is really difficult right now to be navigating complex topics because it seems that every conversation that we're having is just so politically charged, and it seems as if someone is always bound to get upset or get hurt. And it feels really scary to stand up for yourself, to talk about something difficult or to disagree with someone. But we have to disagree with other people, and especially we have to challenge people who are um, infringing on our rights. In the disability space, a lot of people who are in this room are organizers who have not been afraid to speak their mind and really vocalize when their rights are being taken away. And that's what makes such a good advocate and an organizer is being willing to do things that scare us, such as standing up for ourselves. Um, and the only reason that we have the rights that we have now is because there were advocates in the past who were willing to keep the rest of us safe by doing really difficult things, such as doing the Capitol crawl or, you know, doing sit-ins at legislators' office or at the rotunda of the Capitol or doing lunch counter sit-ins or stopping, harmful pipelines from being built. Like there's things that we have to do in order to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And that's why it's so important to be brave and to also learn about the history of organizing that comes before us. I think it often feels daunting to step into advocacy because a lot of us aren't taught the history of what it took to get here, right? We're not taught about the fact that Harriet Tubman was a disabled woman who also was fighting for the rights of disabled people. We're not taught about Fannie Lou Hamer being disabled. We're not taught about all of these important histories that kind of make us feel as if we're isolated in the current moment and we don't know what's happened before us. That's why it's so important to be learning our history and to be in spaces like this one where we get to talk about people who change things for us so that we understand that we're part of this longer story and we feel more brave and bold to join in to the fight alongside many others who have, given up a lot of their freedoms for our safety. And something that's really important for us to remember is that um, we don't all know all of the answers. I don't know all of the answers, and I'm sure that towards the end of this discussion, one of you will bring something up that I haven't considered before. Um, and that's why it's so important that we're moving with understanding and forgiveness, right? We have to give people the opportunity to make mistakes, and we also have to give them the opportunity to grow and to learn. And we want to think about the golden rule, right? Treat others how you want to be treated. You want to be able to make a mistake. You want to be able to be human and to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing at a certain time, but then be invited back into the conversation by growing. So it's important for us to give other people the opportunity to learn and grow the same way that we hope will be given to us. And like I said before, a lot of the things that are seen as impolite are things that are really, really important for us to engage in. So here are some examples of ways that we can get involved in passionate civic engagement that sometimes is seen as impolite, but ultimately is part of being a good citizen and a good and civil person. Political education. You could teach people the way that we're teaching in the legislative advocacy series. You could get involved in civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action. Civil disobedience just means disrupting the day-to-day flow of people's lives as a way to bring attention to a cause. um, Political advocacy. If you're someone who has the ability and desire to advocate for a specific politician or a specific piece of legislation, then you should definitely do that. That's a really, really important way to be an engaged citizen or engaged civil person. Self-advocacy. We have many very important self-advocates in this room, and we're always looking to have more stories told. That's an act of bravery in itself. It's an act of vulnerability. Mutual aid. Mutual aid just means supporting your community by maybe someone doesn't have enough money for rent or they don't have the food that they need to feed their children. Our communities are very strong and resilient, and the way that we're going to move forward in having a better world is by building bonds amongst one another and community organizing. So some of you know that the Going Home Coalition started as a grassroots organizing group. There are many, many community organizations to get involved with, and a lot of the organizations are involved in things that are seen as impolite, but ultimately are a very important part of our democracy. That's where rallies and protests and sit-ins and occupations come in. And it's so important to remember that not everyone is going to see us as polite or as not making a fuss, but we only get our rights by fighting for them, right? We're not gonna, no one who is in a position of power is gonna hand us our rights. So we have to make some noise. We have to make some good trouble, like John Lewis said. So to end, I want to close with a story about maintaining your humanity even when you are treated as not a person. So, some of us may f be familiar with the march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. It was something that organizers had been trying to lead since 1963. They had been creating voting rights drives to get Black people registered to vote in Alabama. And these drives were stopped by people who did not want Black people to vote. And as part of a way to kind of bring awareness to the fact that Black people were being disenfranchised or not given the chance to vote, organizers had been leading marches and they had been leading them throughout Selma and also had been planning marches from Selma to Montgomery. Unfortunately, there were many people who wanted to cause harm to these organizers, and so they weren't really able to get their movement up off the ground until 1965 when the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, became involved. And SCLC, as some of us know, was a very, very large organization that was part of the civil rights movement. And it was the most influential organization that was part of the Southern Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. And one of the leaders of SCLC was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1965, the SCLC was brought into Alabama to lead some sort of march or rally, and they decided that they were going to ha go return again to this idea of an extended march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to draw attention to their cause. It's about 30 miles. And along the way, they were beaten and shot at, and several people were killed. And it became known as Bloody Sunday because it resulted in the death of multiple people. Despite it all, despite being attacked by people who saw the Black organizers as less than human, they remained nonviolent. And after the march, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. Um, and I want to bring attention to this that we're not acting civilly towards people who disagree with us because we want to be better than them or because we want to show them up. We're acting civilly because we believe in the rights of everyone. We believe in the ability to be free for everyone. And so even those people who are fighting against us, who don't want us, who don't see us as human, we are fighting for their rights too. And that's why it's so important to remain civil and to return to this idea of moving with respect. so that we don't forget that even the people who disagree with us are humans too, and they do deserve respect. And the better world that we're fighting for is one where we're all free. And even if they don't realize it now, they are going to be freer and more happy and more successful and more satisfied in community in a free world that we create for one another. So I wanted to remind us of the important work of Black organizers during the civil rights movement who, despite being treated with the utmost disrespect, despite being, you know, hit by fire hoses and being chased by the Ku Klux Klan and, being shot at and having bombs put into their houses. They still remained dignified, they still remained respectful, and they still maintained their bravery in fighting for a better world where everyone is free. Um, so as advocates and organizers, we have the privilege and the honor of following in the footsteps of these great and revolutionary people um, would who we would be very very much in a bad place without. So this picture is from the march from Selma to Montgomery. And from the left, you can see Reverend Ralph Abernathy, James Foreman, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Reverend Jess Douglas leading the voting rights march to the Montgomery County Courthouse. Um, so I want to end with that and pass things to move things towards our question and answers. I want to invite Curtis back into this conversation because I'm sure he has a lot to share. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Does anyone have anything that they want to push back on that I shared in this conversation? And like I mentioned before, Jennifer dropped a bunch of links in the chat, information about the Selma to Montgomery marches, about Sojourner Truth, the Indigenous Chicago map, so that you all can go and learn a little bit more about it. Curtis, do you have anything that you want to add to this conversation?
Yes, our Voting Rights Act was weakened by the Supreme Court in 2013. Racist right wingers led, and so the states have since suppressed voting rights across the country, including southern states. They opposed the Voting Rights Act in 1963 or 1965.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
That's
then
really,
there's this
oh, sorry.
bill called the SAVE Act that will suppress more voting rights and make it harder to vote. That was passed on by MAGA Republicans, Trump people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Thanks,
it's up to us
Curtis.
to stop it from being passed in the Senate. So
Yep.
Robert raised his hand.
Yep, go ahead, Rob. Bob.
I was just gonna say that I learned something, and I always do everything, but I learned that um the current president and the 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 times that you were talking about, all of that stuff, well, we made all kinds of progress, but we seem to we under uh, the administration that we have now, we seem to be going backwards instead of forward. So when you were talking about that lady that you were talking about, uh, uh, how how many years ago was it? How many years ago was that?
So she was born during the time of enslavement, but right at the end. So she was alive when the Emancipation Proclamation was passed. I don't know exactly when she was born, but my guess is that she was born in the 1860s, maybe, or 70s. I'm not sure how old she was when the Emancipation Proclamation was passed. And she fought for voting rights for women, but did not see she did not see women gain the right to vote. So she died before that happened. Um, let's see. And yeah, I want to bring it back to what you guys both said that our rights to vote, our rights are currently being attacked. And so that's why it's really important for us to be in this fight. Um, because we are, it's never over. We're always going to be fighting for a better world. Um, and yes, everyone, please pay attention to the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is an act that is going for a vote in the Senate that will basically require proof of citizenship to be able to vote. And what that means is that you will need to bring a passport or a birth certificate. And this is going to affect many people, but it's going to especially affect people who are disabled because they likely won't have access to something like a passport or a birth certificate, or will have harder access to it. And then also women. So a lot of women, their current name, their legal names is different than what is on their birth certificate because they took their husband's name after they were married. So that's going to present an issue for women as well. So definitely be aware of the SAVE Act. It's supposed to go for a vote like I thought it was going for a vote last week, but it never happened. So what I would recommend you do is reach out to your senators and in Illinois, we have Senator Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, and go ahead and reach out to their offices, send them an email, and let them know that you oppose the SAVE Act. I see that we have a question from Sharon. Jennifer, did you have something about the SAVE Act?
No, actually, I
Okay.
was, well, other than let's speak out and let people know about it, but I was thinking about Sharon's question. So I think let's go with that first. And if
Okay.
it's okay for me to add in after you and Curtis
Yeah,
respond,
absolutely.
I would love that.
So Sharon says in the chat, with regard to respecting people, what if someone is continuing to be rude to you? How do you get the courage to speak up for yourself while still being respectful when it happens a lot? Participant question in our group. So obviously this is a really difficult question and it depends on the situation, but I would say that it's possible to be respectful while not letting someone be rude to you. And there are several ways that you can address that situation. You can say to them, please stop being rude to me. And that is one way to be very direct and say, I don't like that you speak to me like that. And that is one way that you are standing up for yourself and your rights. You can remove yourself from the situation and say, I don't want to be around you. And I don't think it's like weak or a bad choice to remove yourself from a situation where your rights are being affected and being taken away or where someone is treating you with disrespect. Just because we're fighting for a world where everyone is safe doesn't mean that we have to expose ourselves to hatred or violence or disrespect just because we are respectful people ourselves. I think there is a certain point at which you realize that someone is not going to engage in healthy discussion with you or respectful discussion. And at that point, it's okay to say, I'm sorry, but I don't want to have this conversation anymore, and you need to respect my rights. Jennifer, what did you want to add to that?
I needed to make sure my audio was on. Before I go, Curtis, do you have anything that you want to say about to that question? If somebody is continuing to be rude to you, do you have any
Yes,
tips?
just tell them to please respect me. Please encourage me.
Thank you. I want to just echo that. I think one of the things, I'm going to give a little bit of background and then jump back to the answer. I am uh, an adoptive parent as well as a person with disability and a parent of people with disabilities. One of the resources that we had, it was called for adoption, it was called the Wise Guide. And it was really helped because that can be really stressful. So using the word wise really helped us know what our choices were in the moment. And so if somebody's continuing to be rude to you, you can walk away. You don't even have to say anything sometimes. You can, so that's WI it's private. I don't have to answer that question. If they're asking you questions or egging you on, um, depending on what they're saying, that could be an appropriate response. Sometimes you can share a story if it's enough where you can handle that. If you have some stories that are kind of ready and you want to give that a try, sometimes if you don't show offense and you share a story, that can disarm people and they might be willing to listen to you and then just educate in general. But I just want to reaffirm what Rio and Curtis said, that you never have to take disrespect. And so have that firm for yourself. And sometimes the courage to speak up for yourself is just knowing when it's okay not to speak and then going back to your community and letting them know what happened and getting some ideas that might be specific to that situation. So hopefully that's a little bit of help.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's 10:55, so I'm gonna just go ahead and close things out by passing it back to Curtis.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Bob.
For you. Do you have um do you have a fact sheet on the the Save Act?
Do I have, sorry, a what on the SAVE Act?
Do you have a
A
fact?
fact sheet, no, but there are fact sheets online, and I can, I know that there is 5 calls going around about the SAVE Act, which is like a way to connect with your legislators. I don't have one written up, but I can distribute one, to make sure that people have information about the SAVE Act.
Uh, or you could just give me the website where I can find it.
Okay. I don't have one right like with me right now, so I'd have to go look for the link, but I can distribute that to you. I'll make sure you get it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, Curtis, you want to close us out?
Sure. Next slide. Thank you all for going there. My apologies for being a little tired and sleepy for a bit doing this webinar. But you have to be respectful that future y'all push webinars to get plenty of sleep before you come on here. But anyway, I want to contact Jennifer, Rio, and myself if you have any questions. And enjoy the rest of your day. And we're gonna give you your day back. Now, coming up next, a week from today, is how a bill becomes a law at the federal and state levels at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll send you the slides recorded, slide resources, and vocabulary words after the session. Well, thank you to our sponsor, the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities.